UNDP to many countries including Sierra Leone, Tanzania, the Seychelles and Uganda. Dr. Robert Kwekwata Gardner and Dr. K.Y. Amwako both served as the executive secretaries of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Ambassador Kenneth Darcy was the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development UNCTAD between 1986 and 1994. Ambassador Kwesi Kwartey, a career diplomat and former Deputy Foreign Minister, is currently Deputy Chairman of the AU Commission. Ms. Hannah Tete is now Director General of the United Nations Office in Nairobi, Kenya. Ambassador Kebi Asante was one of the 10 pioneer Foreign Service officers who blazed the trail in establishing Ghana's foreign policy credentials and ensured that the civil service machinery worked efficiently to support the political leaders. In 1979, Mrs. Gloria Nikoi became the first female foreign minister. She was appointed by military head of state General Ignatius Kutu Champong, who curiously never traveled outside Ghana in his 6 years in office except for a day's trip to neighboring Togo. The visit was only announced on the evening news after his safe return home. Ghana's heads of state in the Fourth Republic have consolidated the nation's cardinal foreign policy of good neighborliness and regional leadership. Between 1992 and 2000, former President Rawlings served for 2 terms as chairman of ECOWAS in the heat of the Liberian Civil War and played a notable role in peace efforts in then war-torn Liberia, which led to the end of the crisis that claimed about 250,000 lives and displaced millions. He was also ECOWAS chairman for 2 terms and saw to the successful negotiations that brought peace and post-war reconstruction to Sierra Leone, Côte d'Ivoire and Liberia. Both Mrs. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and her successor, Mr. George Oponwea, conferred upon former President J.A. Kufuor Liberia's highest state honor. In 2007, violence broke out in Kenya following disputed elections. Hundreds were killed in a mayhem that threatened to destabilize the East African country and the sub-region. It took the wisdom of President Kufuor, chairman of the African Union at the time, to appoint Kofi Annan, who had then retired as Secretary General of the UN, to intervene and mediate for a government of national unity and pull Kenya from an otherwise apocalyptic brink. As ECOWAS chairman in 2014, President Mahama worked to restore democratic order in Burkina Faso after long-term leader Blaise Compaoré was ousted following 27 days of civil unrest. President John Mahama was part of a delegation led by the then ECOWAS chairperson, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, to meet with and persuade President Yahya Jammeh to hand power over to Mr. Adama Barrow. President Akufo-Addo assumed office when a looming political crisis in the Gambia was at its peak. The tension was due to President Jammeh's reluctance to hand over power to the president-elect. President Akufo-Addo deployed Ghanaian troops to ensure a smooth and peaceful transfer of power in the Gambia. He and President Mahama deployed some of Ghana's best legal brains and maritime specialists and leveraged their own diplomatic skills to resolve a major maritime dispute over oil-rich waters with neighboring Côte d'Ivoire to the mutual satisfaction of the 2 countries following their acceptance of a ruling by the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. President Akufo-Addo was also commended at the 54th ECOWAS Ordinary Session in December 2018 for his policy proposals aimed at building trust and confidence amongst political actors in Togo, where the government and opposition parties are jostling for power. Since September 2017, President Akufo-Addo has made various attempts to restore peace in the former French colony. Since 2001, Ghana has adopted economic diplomacy as the main plank of her international relations. This involves using a range of diplomatic activities and tools to influence investment, trade, aid, and other economic outcomes for Ghana's benefit. Ghana became a beacon since independence for people of African descent and civil rights leaders globally. Inspired by Dr. Nkrumah's Pan-Africanist ideas, many historical figures made what they considered to be a pilgrimage to Ghana. Among them, Dr. Martin Luther King and his wife, Coretta Scott King, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, and trumpeter Louis Armstrong. Ghana also provided support for the liberation struggles of other colonies to catalyze their own liberation. Ghana became a home for exiled African liberation fighters from all over the continent, particularly Southern Africa. Even today, Ghana continues to attract inspirational figures from the African diaspora, as evidenced by a group of celebrities from the US, Britain, and the Caribbean who chose to spend Christmas in Ghana in 2018. At the bilateral level, Ghana has hosted leaders from across the globe. In 1961, President Kwame Nkrumah received the then Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, just a year after Ghana became a republic. In November 1999, the Queen returned and was hosted by President Rawlings. In March 1998, President Bill Clinton of the United States paid a historic visit to Ghana.
What Akwaba really means. Thank you. Thank you so much.
In January 2008, President J.A. Kufuor received US President George Walker Bush. President Bush's successor Barack Obama also visited Ghana in July 2009, hosted by President John Evans Atta Mills. Mr. Obama was the first US president to deliver a speech in Ghana's parliament. Under President Akufo-Addo, Ghana continues to receive world leaders who recognize the country's place in the affairs of Africa and the world. Notable among them are the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, French President Emmanuel Macron, the Queen of Denmark, and several European leaders, US First Lady Melania Trump, Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, and African leaders including Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara. Responsibility to protect, a global principle under which external powers could intervene in the internal affairs of other countries to prevent genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Other illustrious Ghanaian diplomats who have unfurled Ghana's flag in the international arena include Dr. Alex Kwesi-Nsaki, the first diplomat from a black African nation to serve as president of the UN General Assembly. Another Ghanaian achievement in world peace is the effort of Nana Akufo-Addo, then Ghana's foreign minister under the Kufuor administration. Nana Akufo-Addo, now Ghana's president, chaired a high-level Security Council meeting in August 2006 that took the decision to halt Israel's incursions in Lebanon. Given that the Security Council is one of the highest organs of the UN, and also that the decision to elect Nana Akufo-Addo to chair a Security Council session did not attract any dissenting voices, speaks volumes of Ghana's image as promoter of international peace and security. Mrs. Mary Chinri Hesse was the first African woman resident coordinator of the United Nations system and resident representative of the UNDP to many countries including Sierra Leone, Tanzania,
A minute more.
Okay. Go. Go. Okay. Ready? They're ready.
Good day to everyone. Good day to everyone, wherever in the world you may be. My name is Kweku Sechiado. I'm a member of the Council on Foreign Relations Ghana. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 6th in the Distinguished Guest Lecture Series of the Council on Foreign Relations Ghana, or CFR Ghana. CFR Ghana is an independent, non-partisan, non-profit international relations think tank. Today, our speaker is the UN Under-Secretary General, Deputy Under-Secretary General Amina Mohammed, Under-Secretary General, UN Under-Secretary General Amina Mohammed, and she speak on multilateralism at 75. What next? Multilateralism at 75. What next? Obviously, it's an apt topic as we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations Organization. I'm speaking from Accra and in the company of Ambassador Cabral Bliamehia, who is the Vice President of CFR Ghana, and also in the company of Ambassador Kwame Tinkrang, and in the chair for the event, Ambassador D.K. Osei, President of CFR Ghana, seasoned diplomat and author of the recent book, Privileged Conversations, Adventures of an African Diplomat. You must get yourself copies in the libraries of the United Nations headquarters and all your branches around the world. I shall hand over now to Ambassador D.K. Osei to take to steer affairs from here on. Ambassador D.K. Osei.
Well, thank you very much. And on behalf of the CFR Ghana, I have the honor and privilege to welcome the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, who was honored that by accepting to address the Council on the theme Multilateralism at 75, What Next? I'm also pleased to welcome Your Excellencies, our distinguished guests, and our friends who have joined us from all over the globe. This, as Kweku indicated, is the 6th in our distinguished guest lecture series. You will recall that our very first lecture, which was delivered by Baroness Valerie Amos, was on the theme, Does the Retreat from Multilateralism Create New Opportunities for the African Continent? In which she talked extensively about Agenda 2063, Brexit, Africa, peace and security on the continent, and the need to build partnerships to address the challenges in the ecosystem. For those who have been following the Council's activities, I'm sure you will also recall that in our third lecture, the then President of the UN General Assembly, Her Excellency Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, addressed Council on the theme Responding to Global Challenges in a Fast-Changing World, the Case for Strengthening Multilateralism, in which she also talked about climate change, economic and social and political challenges, and the implications for the health and future of the international system. So here we come again, barely on our 6th lecture, and we are returning to the theme of multilateralism. I'm certain that by now, all those who have been following our lectures must be wondering why this obsession, or rather, should I say attention, or rather keen attention to the subject of multilateralism. The response, in our view, is rather simple, and I have no doubt that by the time that Her Excellency Amina Mohammed has finished delivering her paper, you will come to the same conclusion as the Council has on the pivotal role that multilateralism will play in responding to all the major global challenges in the 21st century, particularly, including rather, the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm particularly pleased that Her Excellency Amina Mohammed has honored us by agreeing to deliver this paper. And for two main reasons, and let me add that these are not views of the council, these are very personal reasons. The first reason is that each time I've heard Amina speak, I hear something that I haven't heard anywhere else. The second thing is that each time I've heard Amina speak, I hear something that I don't expect from a Deputy Secretary General of the UN. And for us diplomats, that is a feat, because in diplomatic language you try to work. So I have no doubt that we're in for a real treat, and I really look forward to following, like all of you, today's lecture. Once again, let me welcome all of you to this exciting lecture, and Kweku, I hand over to you again.
Thank you, Ambassador D.K. Osei. I think our next next on the lineup is an invitation to Martha Pobi.
I will.
Who will introduce the distinguished speaker this afternoon on this side of the Atlantic.
Kweku, maybe before she introduces the Deputy Secretary General. Martha Pobi, as you know, is our permanent representative in New York. But perhaps you're also aware that Ghana is fully on the campaign trail to have her elected as the next Vice President of the AU Commission. So those of you who are on this conference, I'm almost about to say, perhaps the lady about to speak to us may well be the next Vice President of the AU Commission. Martha, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Say, and it is indeed my privilege and great honor to introduce the distinguished guest speaker for today, Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and Chair of the United Nations Sustainable Development Group. Prior to her appointment as Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Mohammed served as Minister of Environment of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, where she steered the country's efforts on climate action and efforts to protect the natural environment. She has previously also served as an advocate on increasing access to education and other social services, and as advisor to 3 successive presidents of the Republic of Nigeria on poverty, public sector reform, and sustainable development. Her involvement in the work of the United Nations dates back to 2012, when she served as special advisor to former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon with the responsibility for post-2015 development planning. She led the process that resulted in global agreement around the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the creation of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is no wonder, therefore, that Secretary General Antonio Guterres took the wise and prudent decision to appoint her as Deputy Secretary General and to entrust her with key processes towards the implementation of the SDGs and to leading the reform of the UN development system, including a reinvigorated resident coordinator system and country teams that are able to deliver. Ms. Mohammed has served with distinction to the admiration of member states. And for those of us from Africa who rightly claim her as our own, she has been a source of great pride. Her deep passion for sustainable development, financing for the development, and commitment to reforming the UN development system to make it truly fit for purpose in advancing the ambitious, comprehensive, and universal SDG goals and targets became very evident in those early days when she assumed office. It would be remiss on my part if I don't mention the fact that also Ms. Amina Mohammed has been a great champion of women, the UN Gender Parity Strategy, and in advocating and supporting the appointment of more women into senior positions at the United Nations. In Africa, she has been instrumental in the establishment of the African Women Leaders Network, and through field visits to countries in transition from conflict, has looked out for women and how to strengthen and support their meaningful inclusion in peace-building efforts. Of course, it goes without saying, she's been conferred with several honorary doctorates and has served as an adjunct professor, lecturing on international development. She's a recipient of various global awards and has served on numerous international advisory boards and panels. On a very personal note, if I may conclude on a personal note, I wish to say that it's been a wonderful experience knowing and working with such an accomplished and competent woman. She's an amazing woman who I've also had the honor to call my sister. And on a lighter note, we have agreed to disagree on whether Ghana Jollof or Nigeria Jollof is leading in the Jollof competition. No matter what, as she would always say to me, they both taste better than Oyibo food. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite our distinguished guest speaker, Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, to deliver her address. Madam Deputy Secretary General, your audience awaits.
Thank you so very much, Professor Sai. It was wonderful to hear you. And let me just say that when I got an award from Foreign Policy as Diplomat of the Year, I had to get back to them to say to them, I think you made a mistake. It's the Amina Mohammed, Minister of Foreign Affairs in Kenya. But unfortunately, that was not the case. But maybe this is just a new form of diplomacy that we're trying to push so that we can actually get the results from the many generations of work that we've done in this arena. Ambassador Kogi, thank you so much, Martha. You are my sister of another mother. It has been a pleasure to serve with you, and I'm always saying that I want to be like you when I grow up, take those diplomatic skills and really become stronger, stand on your shoulders. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and dear friends in the audience, I am absolutely sure. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. I'm truly humbled by this esteemed gathering. And the Ghana Council of Foreign Relations is an important forum. It's a critical forum for dialogue, and I welcome the opportunity to share my thoughts with you at this pivotal moment in world affairs, but also to applaud you for the diverse constituencies that you have brought into this room and that are present today. I'd like to start by recognizing the close ties between Ghana and the United Nations. Ghana's successful independence struggle and its entry into the United Nations in 1957 inspired a wave of self-determination and decolonization efforts that in turn led to a dramatic increase in the organization's membership. Across the decades since, the UN agencies have worked hand in hand with the people of Ghana to advance economic growth, social progress, peace, and human rights. Today, that relationship is embodied in a sustainable development partnership, and it continues to underpin the need for international cooperation. Since the early 1970s, Ghanaian women and men have served in the United Nations peacekeepers with nearly 2,500 soldiers, police, experts, and staff serving in a dozen operations and offices. Ghana is in fact the 10th largest contributor. And of course, Ghana's illustrious son, my mentor, the late Kofi Annan, led the UN with verve and distinction. He was active right to the very last of his days, a diplomatic elder, but youthful in the energy he brought to his work for progress and for peace. Ghana's achievements are noteworthy and important, and it is you who have built a strong democracy and made your country a pillar of stability in the region. It is you who have integrated the Sustainable Development Goals into your agenda and into the spending and investments that you make in people's lives. With the United Nations and multilateralism as your helpmates, Ghana has built solid foundations for achieving further progress and staying resilient in the face of many crises. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we meet today as the world wrestles with one such crisis, the biggest global test since the founding of the UN, the COVID-19 pandemic. I begin by offering my condolences for the lives lost from the spread of the virus in Ghana, more than 300 at the last count. President Akufo-Addo spoke movingly about the impacts in his address to our General Assembly last month, quoting him, "We have learned not to shake hands or hug our loved ones," he said. And he went on, "For many people, the most difficult thing to deal with in these uncertain and unsettling times has been the silence forced on churches, mosques, temples, and other places of worship. Singing in groups has become a dangerous activity." United Nations family stands with all Ghanaians as we confront this challenge. Alongside the death and the destruction, however, we should also recognize the ways that Ghana and Africa in general have responded. Most countries on the continent acted rapidly. Amid tremendous fears about the potential death and devastation, Africans have donned masks, deployed health workers, used the knowledge from previous disease outbreaks to largely dodge the worst on this one. Of course, continued vigilance is of the utmost importance until a safe and effective vaccine is found and is accessible and afforded to everyone everywhere. The UN is calling for donors, our colleagues, to step up and meet the financing gap on the vaccine effort. And this really is where the spirit of multilateralism needs to prevail. We are also pressing for a massive global response package that enables the world's most vulnerable countries and people to cope with the devastating side effects of the COVID pandemic, the economic and social impacts. Poverty is rising for the first time in 3 decades. Some 130 million people are at risk of being pushed into the brink of starvation by the end of the year, going hungry. We are veering further off track of the work that we need to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Moreover, global solidarity has been lacking, as countries have gone largely in their own direction, seeing only to themselves. Our global humanitarian response plan, targeting 63 countries facing conflict, disaster, or other dire circumstances, is only 34.8% funded. The virus has also laid bare gaping inequalities and systemic injustices within and among countries. It has given the world a look at the upheaval that might be caused by climate change, with massive amounts of resources being deployed now for pandemic-related stimulus and support plans and projects to re-energize our economies. How the world allocates this money will be a make or break moment for climate action, for biodiversity, and the health of our planet. Recovery from the pandemic is our chance to address these challenges and other deeper ills, and again, on the platforms of international cooperation, of solidarity, of that interaction and integration of a human family, of a global village that is absolutely necessary to get the impacts that we are asking for. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, yes, you will note that the title of the remarks is Multilateralism at 75, What Next? And it is perfect timing. The COVID pause on the world has been a time for reflection, a time that we must do the unusual, that we must see development as an emergency, and that the global response must be one that reaches everywhere and every person. In fact, it is the United Nations that turned 75 just 4 days ago, as we mark the anniversary of entry into force of its founding charter, still as relevant today as it was then. Multilateralism has been around much longer, of course. We used it when used to its fullest, it has generated great progress. When missing in action, it has abetted tragedy after tragedy. The chairperson of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki, speaking last month to the United Nations Security Council, called for a renaissance of multilateralism at this crucial time. He said the people of the world are hungry for effective global governance that can really deliver for them. Africa has contributed immensely to the advancement of multilateralism through the African Union and other pan-continental endeavors that send a powerful message of cross-border awareness and solidarity. The Continental Free Trade Agreement and the Great Green Wall are some of those frameworks that come immediately to mind, crossing borders, reaching everyone. These have demonstrated not only African dynamism, but also reshaped the wider narrative about the continent, moving from a focus on security concerns to socioeconomic transformations and Africa's presence and leadership in the world. Ghana has been a leading voice in nurturing that ethos. Ghana's leadership role on regional peace and security issues, especially since assuming its role as the chair of the ECOWAS Authority, is laudable, and in particular, the United Nations welcomes the growing cooperation between Ghana and UNOWAS in preventing and mitigating an electoral crisis in many countries with their upcoming elections, as we also support the resolution of the crisis in Mali. Again, I would be remiss not to mention that another illustrious son of Ghana, our Under-Secretary General, Mohammed, leading that institution, that organization, and its work over the past few years. One cannot forget the critical role that President Akufo-Addo plays as an SDG advocate to advance implementation of the SDGs. In this respect, the United Nations welcomes initiatives such as the SDG Investment Fair that has been organized by the country in the context of the launch of the AFCFTA to promote development in SDG financing, roadmaps in collaboration with the World Economic Forum and the UN. It's really important here that the partnerships part of our multilateralism, of our international cooperation, is seen to produce the results of the frameworks that are carefully negotiated, sometimes over years, taking those words on paper into the lives of people. The role of women in advancing peace and security and sustainable development cannot be overemphasized. The mediation role is critical, especially in transitions. And what comes to mind right now is, of course, the transitions in Mali and in and in Sudan. In this regard, the United Nations also acknowledges the contributions that you've made in multilateral efforts to promote the meaningful participation of women and gender equality. The Gender and Development Initiative for Africa, which was launched by the President under the theme African Women as Leaders in Business and Politics, is also a useful model for promoting women's participation in politics and other sectors. We've already seen quick gains from this initiative with the emergence of 3 women presidential candidates for the upcoming elections. We need that collective sensibility and mobilization more than ever this time. Strengthened international cooperation will be crucial in stopping the pandemic, recovering from it, avoiding others, and building a safer and better future for all. Excellencies, fortunately, we do have a roadmap to guide us in the solutions that we need. Our member states have carefully, over a period of 4 years, framed the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. But let me also say that Africa was at the forefront in taking its own agenda, Agenda 2063, and ensuring that its ambitions were not capped by an international agenda, but aligned. And I do know that the first 10-year action plan of the African Union is what we use in the 2030 Agenda to ensure those ambitions are not capped. Indeed, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals address many of the roots of the world's current fragilities and vulnerabilities. Africa's Agenda 2063 has been one that has encompassed all aspects across the 3 pillars that we live and work with in the United Nations: our peace, our development, and our human rights. Together, these plans can steer us through the recovery to a much more prosperous, equitable, and sustainable world, and address the world's current fragilities and vulnerabilities. Even before the pandemic, we had embarked upon a decade of action to accelerate the work of the SDGs. That effort is even more urgent than ever as we stand to remain off track. I'd like to point to 5 critical areas that are at the core of our socioeconomic response plans for COVID-19. And the thrust of that really is to ensure that we don't, for COVID's response, put on pause all the other frameworks that we have, because they are what we need to use to lift and urgently, perhaps even in some cases, leapfrog the advances. First, putting health first. The pandemic has made clear we need to strengthen our health systems, our services to people, and ensure that this global public good remains a right for everyone. Second, protecting people. Societies around the world need to strengthen access to and the quality of basic services. We also need a new generation of social protection. Protecting people will also mean investing in them, particularly our young people, the largest cohort that we have known in Africa, but also across the world. And today that means taking advantage of the digital revolution. We've seen the progress in this country that you have made in enormous leaps in building digital infrastructure to power the digital economy and in using new technologies for health and agriculture, as well as better targeting and expanding its social protection program. Along with investments in education, these technologies can be powerful enablers and equalizers and can help drive a pandemic recovery. And so when we see our children out of school because of lockdowns, then there's more urgency to make connectivity a reality for teachers, but also for our students. Third, in keeping economies and households afloat by protecting jobs and small and medium-sized enterprises. This is critical for young people who are setting out as entrepreneurs and need, in many cases, to move from the informal sector to the formal sector. And we've seen in many places around the world where we've been able to transfer to a digital platform hundreds of thousands of small businesses in the informal sector. We need to make investments, again, with our small and medium enterprises, young people, women at the forefront. Fourth, ensuring a strong macroeconomic response and multilateral collaboration, including from our donors and the international finance institutions. This over and over again, the Secretary General has pushed in his financing strategy that has been co-convened with Canada and Jamaica, and with, of course, the support of many of our African nations at the forefront. Fifth, promoting social cohesion and community resilience. Cohesion requires inclusion, and inclusion for us means getting the end to discrimination and marginalization. Community, and the most glaring example of such discrimination has been gender equality. Women's rights movements have made remarkable achievements in recent decades, but as we mark the 25th anniversary, the landmark Beijing Declaration, the struggle faces major pushbacks, and violence against women and girls remains widespread everywhere in the world. It is important to see women not just a quota and not just a number, but the fact is that they are an asset at the table where we make those decisions, whether they are at home, they're in the business place, they're in our cabinets. What we want is to use all the assets that are God-given to us in our countries. And to say that I'm not sure that there is any bird that flies with half a wing. And for every country, we must fly high on two wings. No single step would do more to fortify societies than improving the health and protecting the environment and ensuring equal rights of men and women. No single step would do more to galvanize our economies, make governance more responsive, that social contract between government and the people, make peace more durable, instability is more unlikely, and it is the unfinished business of Beijing and the biggest human rights challenges of our time. And now is the time for us to go that extra mile in securing gender equality in our own interest. Dear friends, in an interconnected world, international cooperation may be an imperative, but it doesn't happen by itself. Many speakers have gone before me to give the efforts into why we need this, and to really underscore the importance that we continue to uphold this, particularly in the constituency of foreign policy making. It takes willing participants to grasp that today's challenges transcend some of our sectors and our borders, transcend the collaboration that needs to have a path for the common good. In my experience as a privileged cabinet member, I would often say that foreign policy stopped with security within the cabinet. There's very little interaction for us with the sectors. And this is what we hope that the framework for sustainable development would bring into that conversation, breaking down those pillars knowing fully well that without peace, there is no development, and without development, there is no peace. And of course, human rights at the core of it is what allows it to be sustainable. International cooperation is not a single method or fixed practice. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought this point home in the most tragic way. But let's remember that multilateralism is not about just warding off the common threats, but it's also about seizing those common opportunities. It needs a mindset that must keep pace with the times. It needs often for us to flip the orthodoxies. It's not an end in itself, but instead a means for getting things done and for showing the results in people's lives. At the UN, as it marks its 75th anniversary, we can clearly see that multilateralism must change. Secretary General Antonio Guterres recognized this and has been calling for a networked multilateralism, in which the UN works more closely with regional organizations such as the African Union and others across the world. He's also promoting what he calls an inclusive multilateralism, in which the United Nations draws on the diverse and dynamic capabilities of civil society, businesses, research institutions, and individual activists. Let's remember that from the individual and the collective, those activists have moved the needle in many of the issues that would not otherwise have been on the agenda. They've kept the fire under our feet. If multilateralism can be more networked and more inclusive, it would also be more effective, delivering the global governance that the world needs at this time. Dear friends, the world has been shaken to its core by a microscopic virus. In these 9 short months, we have learned lessons that will last us a lifetime. We have seen how interconnected we are and how unequal our world is. We've come to understand just how much context matters, as country responses have varied significantly, and not always in ways that might have been predicted, based on leadership, demographics, economic power, and the strength of local institutions and communities. And maybe allow me here to be not so diplomatic, but for the first time, there was no monopoly on good leadership or bad leadership or inequality in one part of the world and not the other. COVID bared for us the realities that the global village faces. We have seen that human rights must be central to our response, and we've seen the importance of global and national solidarity. All of these rights are in our constitutions, but we must again move from the paper of those constitutions and those well-crafted words into the realities that in fact have the impact in the lives of our people. The crisis has opened the eyes of the world to so much that is wrong, but it's also opened the world and doors to what it takes to get things right for the future. Never have we had so many tools or such a cohort of young people with energy, with vision, with education, with access to each other. The foremost multilateral institution of the world still remains the United Nations, owned by member states, with a charter as our guiding light, and we continue to convene for peace, human rights, and development, leaving absolutely no one behind. Often, the gap between the reality and our aspirations is wide. We can but provide the space for hope to thrive, and as we strive daily in our work, be it negotiations, crafting resolutions, peacekeeping, humanitarian work, strategies that will allow economies to become more inclusive, we have to work daily to close that gap from the reality to the aspirations. Some days we succeed, and others we still have much more to do. In the end, we must never fail for lack of trying to serve we the peoples. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to your contributions to the work ahead and our conversation today. By the way, I will be coming to Ghana in the next couple of weeks. It's the first Africa trip that we're making, first after such a time of COVID. It is important that we find that human interaction, again, our solidarity, our support with the people of Ghana, but Africa and the globe at large. I thank you.
investments in education, protecting jobs for SMEs, and having appropriate macro responses for governance in international financial institutions, human rights. But in all that, I think it's the very positive note on which Amina ends that we should continue this discourse, that we should never give up, even though on some days we might not get it right 100%. Amina, once again, thank you very much for such a brilliant presentation. And I'm sure that there may be a few questions. So Kweku, if there are any questions, I'm sure Amina will be quite happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Ambassador D.K. Osei, and thank you once again, Amina Mohammed. So we're happy to take questions or comments. Yeah, you can post it either on the screen or maybe show by hand.
Okay. Okay. Questions. Perhaps let me give the floor to Kweku to make the final remarks, and then we can thank our sister Amina. By the way, we can't wait to see you in Ghana, Amina. And it's good that you've given us notice, and we really look forward to seeing you. Kweku, over to you.
Okay. Maybe I will pose a question then to her before wrapping up. What would you say, Your Excellency, is the reason why Africa appears to have done a lot better than the developed countries when it comes to COVID? What role do you think leadership is played in this? Or is it just down to nature, chance,
Good fortune.
good fortune, God, Allah?
Well, thank you very much for that question. Of course, as a Nigerian, I will say, it's God's will. But on a very serious note, I think that this is not by chance. What this did was to pause the whole world. It went into lockdown. And one of the things that we in Africa have been very used to is institutions and leadership that is always in emergency. There has always been, we've had less to do more. And I think that when this came along, those all came to be, and we were very quick to respond in many cases without very much. I mean, we know our health systems are weak in Africa. We know that by and large, if we allowed for this pandemic to have the same results it did in many parts of the North, we would have been in a catastrophe. We knew that from the Ebola crisis. So I think we took lessons seriously. I think we had capacities and leadership that responded. But what I think is of greater credit to Africa is they found a way to balance what was a bigger emergency, the socioeconomic impact, as much as they could do within their four walls, within the borders of your country. Of course, there have been many more, I would say, knock-on effects that have derailed the positive trajectories that we saw in Africa by the externalities, what is happening from the lockdown in other parts of the world. And that's why we're saying that global response needs to happen where the needs are most on the socioeconomic side. So I think that our leadership has been up and running. I think the CDC for Africa and the way that it has worked across the continent and with the WHO and other United Nations agencies really has consolidated that foot. We do have a large youthful population, and I think that that's helped us. But by and large, I think, let's take credit. The narrative for Africa is always one about the disaster will befell us most, and that we will be least able to cope with it. We need to change that narrative because we have some proof now that with a global crisis, Africa was able to push back That is, as I say, not to remain unvigilant. We have to be vigilant. But we found that balance with our realities and with the crises that we live with daily in many of in the health sector, in the economic sector, and we're just dealing with it better.
Yeah.
So, Ambassador Nico said.
Your Excellency, you may be aware that peacekeeping has been one theater where we've seen international cooperation and multilateralism at great display. From where we sit in New York, what has been the impact of the new world order, the new normal, on peacekeeping operations of the UN?
Well, for the new era, I have to say that, you know, part of the reforms that we've had on peacekeeping have been to bring those pillars together so that we see both our political missions, our peacekeeping missions, finding those pathways. What we want is out of those crises into one of sustainable development. So the cross-pillar work that needs to go on and to shape the new response in multilateralism on peacekeeping, I think is a work in progress right now. And it's very difficult because the mindsets that come with it, and for the decades that we have been in these very protracted situations of conflict, I think today we have an opportunity to really say that, look, can we focus on the end of that conflict, that this is not sustainable, and that the only thing it does is to pull the whole country back, and perhaps in some cases, as we see in the Sahel, the whole of a region back. And I think that we are a different set of capacities and leaderships in Africa today than we were a couple of decades ago. And so our voice at the table, that what you see the Africa Group do in New York to try to change and push back on some of the, I would say, the status quo, to find new solutions, to find new responses, is becoming much more of a reality. But we need to join that up with what is happening on the continent. In West Africa, I think ECOWAS has provided us with a very good platform for that engagement to try to make those changes. If we all witnessed what happened in Mali, it was not an easy negotiation to get to that transition. And it had to pull from all sides, in fact, multilateralism in action, but the region taking leadership for the few countries that would be impacted by this, to a regional body, to the African Union, and then the support of the United Nations. Complex, even more complex than perhaps it has been before, but we don't need to complicate it. We need to remain focused on peace and what it is going to take to invest in that. We also need to know that, you know, what is it that we have that we can do better with our own resources, and that there isn't, you know, the idea that there is someone coming to save the day is no longer a reality. We've seen that displayed in COVID. The response that we needed within the first few weeks and months has not come. That is what presidents tell us every day. So I think in terms of peacekeeping, it is important for us to see the sunset clause for that in the continent. And we have that frame that we work with in the African Union on silencing the guns. How do we make silencing the guns more than just a headline for the African Union, but push that as our priority in all fora that we go to, so that we see the international community getting behind silencing the guns in Africa, and not that we're just adding it on to another couple of frameworks internationally. Much work to do, a lot of reflection, and thinking outside of not just the box, out of the ballpark. You really need to flip things. And I would say that this is important because 75 years on, what we are seeing is an intergenerational transition. And I think that those of us that are in the room today really need to look back and see young people coming, young politicians, young diplomats, young business people, young civil society and activists. And we do need to engage them with more than just a seat in the audience, with more than just a seat at the table. But sometimes we need to yield the chair of that table to them as well. And this, I think, is going to be a big lesson for everything that we're thinking about, if we really are to change, because the status quo, what happened pre-COVID, cannot happen going forward. lest we lose all the opportunities of that leapfrogging that we want and realizing the aspirations of the Africa that we want.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that beautiful presentation, and also for availing yourself to interact with us. My question is, if you were a young person now, knowing what you know now and the experiences you have had, and being passionate about international relations and then diplomacy, what steps would you take to get into the circles of the United Nations? The second question then is, what is the progress so far with the implementation of the El-Zawini Consensus, that's the African Union proposed to the UN in relation to the reforms of the UN, especially the Security Council? Thank you.
Let me answer the one that is the shortest answer I have. The reforms in Security Council remain a work in progress, and we really do, wish our member states more grease, to their elbows, because this is a reform that will benefit many instead of perhaps the few. And maybe that's a little undiplomatic, but we do wish those reforms well. They need to happen. They need to respond to the world that we have today. In terms of, what I know now, what would I do differently? It's always a very difficult question for me, because I've been rooted in wanting to give service in my own community, in my own country. And so even as Minister of Environment, what were my challenges? My challenges were actually conflict, because in everywhere that I had a climate challenge, there was a conflict. Niger Delta and the oil pollution, the Northeastern desertification and Boko Haram, what was happening to our rivers, and what was happening, quite frankly, in the Middle Belt to our herder and farmer conflicts. So, conflict in my world is coexisting with the possibilities of development and the environment. And so, what I do know now, how I would have engaged the UN better, perhaps I would have started from the cabinet in understanding how foreign policy itself would really push the development agenda at the fore, as in fact the panacea to all these other negotiations that we have around conflict and resolutions. So I think it's, I would have done that first at the cabinet, and then I would have just made sure that we didn't, as sectors, just attend our ECOSOC body meetings in Geneva, but we actually pushed for a better translation of what happened there on the ground in the way the UN convenes its support to governments. Now, thankfully, we've just had a reform that member states are being fully behind on development, and I think we are more fit for purpose as a UN footprint on the ground. The work in progress that we have is working across those pillars, how to make sure that the nexus between peace and development and the crisis that we see is much more reinforced, looking at the results that we need, both in the short and the longer term. I hope that we all would see this, if I've learned anything, I hope we all see this as a journey. Everyone has their role to play. Each footstep that we take, we need to make it a solid one. And we need to take people with us, because this is too much of a load to take alone. So that idea of international cooperation has to start, I think, from the inside out. So from our countries, we need to be better connected and better together with our visions and our positions. In the continent, we need to be better together, making the continental vision a reality. And then we are strong when we get to the table in the international arena. And, maybe one of the things I saw in the UN when I first came, I used to look at the General Assembly, and I used to say, well, inequality begins in the General Assembly. As I look at member states who have hardly any capacity to come to the table to negotiate, and other member states who have so much, so that when they come, they almost dwarf the capacity of those that are smaller and more lack the capacities to engage. That was the first place that I began to think, wow, we really need to strengthen the arm of our small island development states, of Africa, of our, LDCs. So I think there's, a lot more to interrogate about what the UN stands for, what it's able to do, what it's not able to do. Sometimes I think that we also need to find a balance there. It is a member state organization. Every member state has a voice. And I think, how we convene those voices and make the connection between the discussions in New York, Geneva, Vienna, Paris, with our country realities will be the challenge we have in the coming years. We have the frameworks, but it's how to make those connections.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, I hope I heard you right when you said something about flipping the status quo. Does this include changing the structure of the UN, including rethinking how the Security Council works and going into the next 75 years of the UN?
Of course, anything that happens on that level is what member states do, but my own contribution would be, unless we find new tools for a new era, then we will cease to be relevant. We will become a relic. And I don't think anyone wants to see this multilateral space be a relic. It's so important for us to have this town hall for the global village. Without it, voices will not be heard, issues will not be discussed. But we have to bring much more equality into it, much more representation, and a bigger realization that the world out there has changed dramatically. And so it's not to make the United Nations into a business organization. We are not. It is not to make us into a civil society organization. We are not. But we must expand that tent so that we bring in the voices that will allow us to have the responses that will connect with the realities on the outside. And that applies to all our bodies, whether it's the Security Council or the General Assembly or ECOSOC. And I think efforts are being made, but it's a really difficult thing to do with 196 members of the family. It's easy with a 12-person board, or you have a few people in a couple of coalitions in civil society. But when you are speaking to nations across the world that are at different places in their development, different interests, different powers, it's a colossal effort. And that's why you see that for years, some of the parts of this reform conversation have moved very slowly. And I think that, perhaps COVID gives us an opportunity. As I say, I think that what really gives us the opportunity is the intergenerational transition. Young people are about to take this in a different direction, not just because they're young, but their space is different. The way that they negotiate, the way they interact, social media, really technology has moved us in leaps and bounds. And so you and I today can convene this meeting overnight. Before, I would have to set this trip up for, I don't know how long to get to Ghana, to make 3-4 days so that I stay and I talk to everybody and I go back. I miss that. And that's why we try to make the effort of coming out now. But the new reality is that if we don't flip the orthodoxies, we're going to get left behind. And I hope that doesn't happen, because we're about, as we say, leaving no one behind. I hope it's not the UN that gets left behind.
No, there's a question from Ayuba, but I think this is not the appropriate forum for the question. So I'm going to ask you to go to www.un.org and you'll get all your responses. Ms. Ayuba, yes. Please go ahead.
So I've got a quick question for you, madam. All the secretaries general of the UN have been men. And I'm not trying to, I'm not asking you to undermine your boss, Secretary General Guterres. However, is it not pretty obvious that the next Secretary General, after Mr. Guterres is done, must be a woman?
Absolutely. No taking, as we say in Nigeria. There must be women, and there are many women out there who are women of substance and that can take this up and take it to a greater level. Let me say that what we have experienced with this Secretary General is the fact that he has opened up the space for us to do the gender parity. So it's not just about women, it's also about the men who understand the value of women in the space of decision-making and leadership. And if you look at the United Nations today, we are more women, but we're also more diverse. And I think we're going to credit to him for that. And we will stand on his shoulders, and I hope that, you know, a woman will take that top job after him.
Thank you very much, madam. I don't see any further questions, and so I suppose it's a good time to say a very big thank you for your time and for your wonderful insights, and also to Ambassador Martha Pobi, who introduced you in the space that she's about to move into, hopefully. So go ahead and smash that glass ceiling, Ambassador Pobi, along with all the women and men that you work with at the United Nations headquarters and around the world. There's no housekeeping announcements from here, so thank you very much once again from Accra.
And we look forward
to seeing you in 2 weeks and having a coconut juice together.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know that you can't offer me jollof rice like Nigeria, so I won't have that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you so much.
Ghana has, since independence, carved a niche for herself in a number of ways. After breaking free from colonialism, Ghana's first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, became also the torchbearer in a struggle for the total liberation of the entire African continent.
We are muted here. Okay, we are open now. Okay. Yes, Martha, I think yes. Yes, we can.
Martha, please go ahead.
You can ask her to go ahead. Yeah, ask her to go ahead now.
Martha, please go ahead.
I just wanted to express appreciation to the Council for Foreign Relations Ghana. I think it was good. The Deputy Secretary General has no doubt very honored by this opportunity to speak. She took it very seriously. We have to meet ahead of this, but I think all said and done, good. And I hope that when she's in Ghana, there'll be an opportunity to meet some of you. Can still see if there's of interest to arrange a few minutes with that. But thank you very much, AG, and thank you, Kweku, and Ambassador
Cabral. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And see you.
Thank you. I don't but that's one of the advantages.
Ghana has, since independence, carved a niche for herself in a number of ways. After breaking free from colonialism, Ghana's first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, became also the torchbearer in a struggle for the total liberation of the entire African continent.
Our independence is meaningless unless it links up the total replacement of the African continent.
Ghana, we now have freedom.
The idea of a united Africa was born in Accra when a number of African leaders met in the Ghanaian capital. With inspiration from Dr. Nkrumah and others, the Organization of African Unity (OAU) was formed in 1963 in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa. The precursor to what is now the African Union, the AU, established on July 9, 2002 in South Africa. Ghana's role in the continent's forward march has been key. Ghana was also a founding member of the Non-Aligned Movement NAM, a member of the African, Caribbean and Pacific Group of States ACP, and has lived up to this. The formation of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, was another step in and building economic and political cooperation and peace in West Africa. Here too, Ghana has been a leader through the decades since ECOWAS was established in 1975. Under the chairmanship of Presidents Jerry Rawlings and John Kufuor, and with Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambers, a Ghanaian, as Secretary General of ECOWAS in the late 90s and 2000s, Ghana's role was key in bringing stability, peace and democracy to Sierra Leone and Liberia after years of chaos and bloodshed. Dr. Chambers has since gone on to head the ACP group of states headquartered in Brussels, served as the UN's Secretary General's representative in Darfur, and now as the representative for West Africa and the Sahel. At both the ACP and ECOWAS, Ghanaians Alhaji Mohammed Mumuni and Ambassador Victor Gbeho became successors after Dr. Chambers. Indeed, Ghana occupies a respectable place in global peace and security. Ghana joined the United Nations on March 8 in 1957, 2 days after independence. Since then, Ghana has contributed more than 80,000 military and police personnel for UN peacekeeping duties, over 30 missions around the world, starting with the Congo in 1960. When civil war broke out in Rwanda in 1994, the UN, under the OAU brokered Arusha Agreement, created the United Nations Assistance Mission in Rwanda, UNAMIR, to provide security for the smooth implementation of the accord. Ghana contributed more than half of the 5,200 troops that served in Rwanda. When all the countries serving in the operation, Belgium, Tunisia and Bangladesh, withdrew their troops at the onset of the genocide, the Ghanaian soldiers stayed. A Ghanaian, General Henry Anyidoho, was Deputy Force Commander and Chief of Staff of UNAMIR. General Anyidoho also served in international peacekeeping operations in Lebanon, Liberia, Cambodia and Darfur. Ghanaian soldiers have served with distinction in Sierra Leone, Liberia, East Timor, Angola, Côte d'Ivoire, and continue to serve in Somalia, Lebanon, Sudan, Central African Republic, the Gambia, and Mali. Indeed, the first commander of the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, when it was established in 1978, was General Emmanuel Erskine, who served for 3 years. In 1999, the UN appointed another Ghanaian, Lieutenant General Seth Obing, to the position. Ghana's involvement in peacekeeping operations across the world led to the establishment in 1998 of the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center at Teshi in Accra. It was named after former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and has trained thousands in peace operations and peacekeeping.
I, Kofi Annan,
Solemnly swear.
solemnly swear.
In December 1996, the late Kofi Annan became the 7th Secretary General of the world body. Before then, Mr. Annan had served as UN Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations. It was under his tenure that UN peacekeeping operations grew in size and scope, with a total deployment of almost 70,000 military and civilian personnel from 77 countries. One of Mr. Annan's legacies to Africa and the world was the introduction in 2005 of responsibility to protect, a global principle under which external powers could intervene in the internal affairs of other countries to prevent genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Other illustrious Ghanaian diplomats who have unfurled Ghana's flag in the international arena include Dr. Alex Kwesi-Nsaki, the first diplomat from a black African nation to serve as president of the UN General Assembly. Another Ghanaian achievement in world peace is the effort of Nana Akufo-Addo, then Ghana's foreign minister under the Kufuor administration. Nana Akufo-Addo, now Ghana's president, chaired a high-level Security Council meeting in August 2006 that took the decision to halt Israel's incursions in Lebanon. Given that the Security Council is one of the highest organs of the UN, and also that the decision to elect Nana Akufo-Addo to chair a Security Council session did not attract any dissenting voices, speaks volumes of Ghana's image as promoter of international peace and security. Mrs. Mary Chinri Hesse was the first African woman resident coordinator of the United Nations system and resident representative of the UNDP to many countries including Sierra Leone, Tanzania, the Seychelles and Uganda. Dr. Robert Kwekwata Gardner and Dr. K.Y. Amwako both served as the executive secretaries of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Ambassador Kenneth Darcy was the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development UNCTAD between 1986 and 1994. Ambassador Kwesi Kwartey, a career diplomat and former Deputy Foreign Minister, is currently Deputy Chairman of the AU Commission. Ms. Hannah Tete is now Director General of the United Nations Office in Nairobi, Kenya. Ambassador Kevi Asante was one of the 10 pioneer Foreign Service officers who blazed the trail in establishing Ghana's foreign policy credentials and ensured that the civil service machinery worked efficiently to support the political leaders. In 1979, Mrs. Gloria Nikoi became the first female foreign minister. She was appointed by military head of state General Ignatius Kutu Echampong, who curiously never traveled outside Ghana in his 6 years in office except for a day's trip to neighboring Togo. The visit was only announced on the evening news after his safe return home. Ghana's heads of state in the Fourth Republic have consolidated the nation's cardinal foreign policy of good neighborliness and regional leadership. Between 1992 and 2000, former President Rawlings served for 2 terms as chairman of ECOWAS in the heat of the Liberian Civil War and played a notable role in peace efforts in then war-torn Liberia, which led to the end of the crisis that claimed about 250,000 lives and displaced millions. He was also ECOWAS chairman for 2 terms and saw to the successful negotiations that brought peace and post-war reconstruction to Sierra Leone, Côte d'Ivoire and Liberia. Both Mrs. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and her successor, Mr. George Oppong-Weah, conferred upon former President J.A. Kufuor Liberia's highest state honor,